Middle Way Philosophy, Introductory Video 6b, Integration of Meaning, The Basis of Understanding and Meaningfulness by Robert M. Ellis. This is a tributary video to video number 6 in the series on integration. In that video, the story of the two mules was used to illustrate the process of integration in general. The two mules have opposing, conflicting desires, which are resolved through the process of integration. The key point at which their position changes is the fourth frame, where they are obliged to reconsider their beliefs and reframe them. It's in that frame that the two mules have another kind of integration that comes into play. Not only the integration of desire and the integration of belief, but also a third, the integration of meaning. It's only because the mules have other possibilities that they can understand and engage with that they are able to think in terms of new beliefs at all. Perhaps also they need to understand each other. So the integration of meaning involves the provision of the basic means of understanding either ourselves in the past or the future, or others. The model of meaning which is used here as the basis of understanding the integration of meaning is embodied meaning. This is the theory of meaning developed by George Lakoff and Johnson on the basis of much linguistic and psychological and neuroscientific evidence. It challenges the traditional view of meaning, which is here called representationalism. It's important to understand meaning in terms of embodied meaning in order to see what the integration of meaning might be about. The whole idea is incomprehensible under representationalism. In representationalism, meaning depends on the conditions for belief. Belief comes first and is assumed to be primary. Other kinds of meaning are second class. Embodied meaning, on the other hand, understands meaning as built up from bodily experience. We make synaptic links in our brains between symbols, such as words, and experiences that relate directly to the activity of our bodies. This enables us to build up a sense of the meaning of various words and symbols, at first in the form of basic categories and schemas, and then in more elaborate abstract forms through metaphor and the construction of cognitive models. It's only on the basis of those that we can form beliefs. So, beliefs are the furthest reaches of our experience. They are not basic. It is meaning that is more basic. When we talk about integration of meaning, we're focusing on the integration of those three lower boxes in the embodied meaning pyramid. The integration of different aspects of bodily experience, the integration of basic categories and schemas, the integration of cognitive models built from metaphors. Where these are shared, that is, shared over time within one person or shared between people, we can talk about that basis of meaning being integrated. It is the meaning of symbols that is integrated in the integration of meaning. By symbols, I mean a wide variety of different kinds of stimulus. In fact, almost any object could be a symbol if it has significance for us. Some of the most widely used symbols are obviously words, but also visual arts, or items of visual art, music, and archetypal symbols such as those used in religion. That means that it's not simply cognitive meaning that we're talking about, as is classically talked about as the basis of meaning in representationalism. We're not just talking about the meaning of sentences or the way in which they relate to a supposed reality. We're talking about the way in which these kinds of stimuli relate to our experience and impact on it. If they impact on our experience in sufficiently similar ways, we can begin to talk about the integration of the meaning of that symbol across different people or across ourselves at different times. So, although the primary field in which we're likely to talk about the meaning of symbols is that of words, it applies across the board in a great many other places. A symbol here is also not distinguished from a sign. There is only distinction between symbols and signs if you're a representationalist and assume that there's some kind of hard and fast distinction between cognitive and emotive meaning. But all the symbols we're talking about here have an emotional or emotive impact on us, as well as a significance that we relate to a certain model of the world as we understand it. The opposite of the integration of meaning is the fragmentation of meaning, the ways in which our meanings are separated, again, either within ourselves or between ourselves and other people. Perhaps the most striking example of fragmentation of meaning is that created by linguistic diversity. Obviously, you can see this between different languages, as commonly understood, for example, between Chinese and English. But you can also see smaller examples of linguistic diversity within a particular language. So, for example, here, the different words for train used by Portuguese speakers and Brazilian Portuguese speakers. Linguistic and cultural diversity goes right down to the personal level, to the ways in which we as individuals may use a slightly different set of words from our neighbours, or indeed members of our own family. Whenever we come across a slight misunderstanding in the use of any terminology or any symbol, this is an example of the fragmentation of meaning. We don't quite understand each other sufficiently. The same may also apply to ourselves at different times. But the fragmentation of meaning also has a strong emotive aspect which is interdependent with its cognitive aspect. Whenever people don't understand each other, it's not simply because of the use of different symbols in different traditions. It's also because a lack of motivation for engaging with one another. To see the opposite at play, the integration of meaning, one of the best experiences is to watch two people in close communication with one another. There you can see how much communication, and hence integration of meaning, at a very personal level, is an embodied process. People communicate with each other at their best with their bodies as well as with their speech. It's not just a question of the cognitive meaning of the terms they use. There's also much revealed by their tone of voice, their posture, their hand gestures. It's through these kinds of ways of becoming aligned with each other that a lot of the basis of integration of meaning can be laid when it comes to interpersonal communication. The ways in which the fragmentation of meaning also applies to ourselves over time must also not be underestimated. This can apply even in basically linguistic terms. This is a personal example. 30 years ago, I was studying Prakrit, and I wrote down a verse in Prakrit in a notebook. Today, I have no idea what it means, though apparently 30 years ago, it was very important to me. Perhaps a more common example of the fragmentation of meaning for an individual over time consists of the use of metaphors involving particular cognitive models. Take this passage from Blake. It's quite difficult to understand or to engage with unless you're already immersed in the series of metaphors, a whole system of metaphor which Blake is using. Again, it's difficult for an individual who studied this in the past to relate to it now. Another form of fragmentation of meaning consists in what Jung called unresolved archetypes. That is, archetypes that we really believe to be embodied in what we attach them to. God is one example of this, particularly if we consider God to be a supernatural entity. The idealized feminine or the idealized masculine provide further examples. Another example of an unresolved archetype is the shadow, where we project an image of the satanic or the evil onto something in the world around us, or more usually somebody. The projection process involves something coming from us and being imposed, at least in our experience, on what it is we're looking at, the screen as it were. So in the example of an individual that you're having some sort of conflict with, an authoritative individual, a boss perhaps, the person as they are is complex in various ways. However, what you see or what you experience due to your projection is the shadow. In other words, you see Satan in the boss, more or less. So, to try and get an overview, let's distinguish 4 different types of integration of meaning, each of them overcoming a type of fragmentation of meaning. These 4 different types are not absolutely distinct from each other. They're a matter of emphasis. We can distinguish different types of integration of meaning along internal versus external lines, that is, within ourselves or in relation to others. But of course, these have an effect on each other. They're not completely distinguished. You can also distinguish them in terms of cognitive and emotive meaning. But again, these are always interdependent to some degree. It's just a matter of emphasis, whether you're talking about cognitive meaning, that is mainly the significance of terms within our view of the world, or whether you're talking about emotive meaning, that is how it feels to us. So when we're talking about internal emotive integration, we're relating more fully to our own past or to symbols that may be repressed in our unconscious mind. We can increase that kind of integration, for example, through meditation, in which we become more aware of our own alternative states. With internal cognitive integration, we need to gain more cognitive understanding of our own past or of repressed symbols, as illustrated by my own example of not understanding something I wrote 30 years ago. If I was to really try and get inside what I was thinking and feeling at that time, I might even need to relearn the language I was using. Then, external emotive integration consists of relating to other symbols, to learn to understand them or relate to them directly. This is very much a question of embodied communication. Then finally, external cognitive integration involves understanding other symbols, which may mean learning their language. But again, language does not necessarily have to be understood in terms of formal national languages such as Chinese and English. It may be a question of learning somebody else's jargon or somebody else's preferred vocabulary in order to be able to relate to them more fully. A temporary peak experience of integration may be associated with the sublime, as experienced, for example, in religious experience or mystical experience, in meditation, or states of artistic rapture or inspiration. These consist of primarily emotive meaning, but also with a cognitive element, in relation to a particular symbol or set of symbols, which are considered to be vastly rich. This is a state of enormous creativity, which can result in some cases in lasting artistic works. It can also result in ways in which we invest in future activity for ourselves. So even if we're not great artists, but we experience temporary peaks of meaningfulness, if we make use of those states in order to help set ourselves up for future experience, then we have made good use of temporary states of integration of meaning. However, those states are temporary. We can't rely on them to always be there. The integration of meaning doesn't consist primarily in such temporary states of rapture. It needs longer-term investment. I'm going to suggest 3 key ways in which we can develop integration of meaning in the longer term. The first of these is adding to our stock of symbols. Simply, the more symbols we understand, the more we can use them in understanding ourselves and others, and in also adding to our active articulacy and our awareness of the relationships between our experience and ways of expressing that experience. We can add to that stock of symbols through education of almost any kind, but particularly in the humanities, which makes us aware of new ways of understanding things. Through appreciation of the arts, and indeed expressive and creative work in the arts for ourselves. Through learning new languages, again, whether you're thinking in terms of national languages or whether you're thinking in terms of particular ways of speaking or writing or understanding. And then finally through reading, whether you're talking about the reading of fiction or non-fiction. Our vocabulary is extended through reading. Our imagination is extended. We have more capacity, more potentiality for thinking in different ways and developing different beliefs in future the more we read. A second method of integrating meaning in the long term is clarification. Clarification is the patient search for more understanding of a particular cognitive model and the words used within that cognitive model, the ways they relate to each other. If we're communicating with somebody else particularly, we need to make sure that we're using a sufficiently compatible cognitive model. These are never going to be exactly the same because they don't line up with reality, but nevertheless there can be a degree of similarity between them, enabling us to communicate effectively. It's very easy to dismiss what we don't understand, but the temptation to dismiss probably indicates that we're on the threshold of a breakthrough of integration of meaning. If we simply persist in asking more and seeking to understand more, we may make that breakthrough and understand something new. A third method of gaining greater integration of belief in the long term is tolerance of ambiguity and tolerance of vagueness. If we always require everything that we come to understand to be crystal clear to start with, we will end up trapped in the cognitive models we started with. Things which are metaphorical, which work on the basis of different sets of symbols and connections, are always going to start out seeming vague and ambiguous. It's only through investigating those things with a tolerance for that vagueness and ambiguity that we can begin to understand more, to open ourselves up to new possibilities. To quote John Stuart Mill, writing about his mentor Jeremy Bentham, who was a bit too impatient with ambiguity, "A man of clear ideas errs grievously if he imagines that whatever is seen confusedly does not exist. It belongs to him, when he meets with such a thing, to dispel the mist and fix the outlines of the vague form which is looming through it." The integration of meaning is closely related to and interdependent with the integration of desire and the integration of belief. The integration of desire, which brings together energies that were previously opposed, has a lot of similarity, particularly to the emotive side of the integration of meaning. When we bring together energies, very often they're associated with symbols. And when they do that, we can describe it as integration of meaning as well as integration of desire. The process of integrating meaning is also closely related to that of integrating belief, particularly more at the cognitive end. For example, when we go into a process of clarification within a particular cognitive model. That could very often involve clarifying beliefs as well as our understanding of the words we're using. When we're avoiding unresolved projection of archetypes, this also involves a question of clarifying our beliefs. If we're not going to confuse the boss with Satan, we need to have a clear idea of what Satan is and a clear idea of who the boss is. That involves our beliefs about each. So, the integration of meaning is simply a distinct way of analysing integration in general. You will find it's inextricable from the other kinds of integration. Nevertheless, it can be a useful way of understanding integration, one which provides a particular way in, closely related to the arts especially, which the others may not provide. So, to summarise the key points, integrated meaning is the development of symbol sharing, whether that's internal within the individual or external in society, in both cognitive and emotive terms. Every symbol having both cognitive and emotive meaning mixed together inextricably. Integrating meaning gives us wider resources to develop new beliefs to be adequate to new conditions. Meaning is fragmented both within ourselves and in the wider world by cultural and linguistic differences, by differing metaphors and cognitive models, which again may be associated with bodily states, and by unresolved archetypes. Meaning can be integrated by increasing our stock of symbols, by clarifying words, and by tolerating ambiguity.